New York City's mayoral elections. Election day is Tuesday, June 24th, 2025, although early voting is already open. I'm actually probably going to go vote tomorrow, which is a Sunday, which is not something I ever took advantage of before. I did it once before, actually. But prior to then, I would always wait for election day because I don't know, I just wasn't informed enough of the whole early voting process. And it's simple as shit. There's literally nothing to it. It's not when we had to request ballots and fill out forms to request ballots during COVID or something like that. You had to fill out forms, send them in, and if they were incorrect, they would send them back and say you couldn't get a ballot and you had to do it within a certain time frame, and then you could get the ballot through mail, then you had to mail it back. It's not that. It's literally, you can go in to vote the same way you would on Tuesday, June 24th, 2025, on election day. The same way you go to your polling site to vote, you have a different polling site for early voting. You know, each district is different, so it's likely not going to be the same place where you go to vote normally, but you just look up your polling site or your early voting polling site the same way you would your polling site from election day, and you just walk in and vote like you normally do on election day. It's literally that simple, and it's open for like a week or more. And I don't think that's highlighted enough because, you know, the whole narrative of how hard it is to vote and voting should be a national holiday, which it probably should be. But we should also highlight the fact that early voting is open for a week plus, and you could do it the same exact way, much more conveniently. Pick the day of your choosing, weekends, different hours, so on and so forth. Anyway, I digress. So the mayoral election this year is likely coming down to two candidates: former Governor Andrew Cuomo and current state assemblyman Zoran Mamdani. Andrew Cuomo, which is your status quo Democratic candidate, and Zoran Mamdani, which is more of the social democrat vein. So think of Bernie Sanders, AOC, which, if I'm not mistaken, he has both their endorsements. Now, recent polls have them pretty neck and neck. Mamdani has cut the lead that Cuomo has had since he stepped into the race substantially. I've seen them project his chances as 48 to 50%, or 47 to 48, 50, 48, 52, 47, 53, 49, 51. So neck and neck, essentially. But realistically, Cuomo is probably going to move on with the election. And honestly, when he entered the race, when he announced that he was going to run for mayor, he had my vote, I feel like, instantly. Not I feel like, I said, yeah, that's what I'm voting for mayor. Again, knowing nothing about the race, my knee-jerk reaction, because I liked Cuomo as a governor. I thought he was a good governor, not completely informed, but just his leadership ability, especially throughout the pandemic, when the whole world was, what the fuck is Trump doing? And everyone was looking to Cuomo for leadership, for those daily press briefings, so on and so forth. It was like, this guy should be president. This guy is going to be the next president. Let's just start listening to him from now. Then he made a few bad moves with the whole scandal with old folks, retirement homes, and how he sent sick people that were in hospitals with COVID out of them into the nursing homes and exacerbated the deaths there. Then, of course, the sexual misconduct allegations, which part of me takes or took with a grain of salt, because I think too many folks got swept up, kind of like a la Aziz Ansari, with the bad dates or a wink or an asking for a number type of thing gets equated to rape. You know what I mean? Like there's so many layers in between, but also where there's smoke, there's fire. So there is that, of course. And it was such a scandal that he had to step down from being governor. I think I did a piece when that happened of like his fall from grace, if you guys want to go back and listen to that. But still, he did have my vote initially. And as time has gone on, and I've watched the debates, listened to where each candidate stands or says that they stand, because again, we're dealing with politicians here, he lost it. He lost my vote. Cuomo did. At the top of the list of reasons why is, I think he's completely wrong on the genocide in Gaza. I think the stranglehold that lobbyists, AIPAC, has on our politicians is disgusting, especially local politicians. It kind of makes more sense at the federal level, but for local politicians, and New York City mayor, you control 5 boroughs, for the timeline of how soon you will travel to Israel to become such a headline narrative for candidates for New York City mayor is just bonkers to me. And I liked Mamdani's response to that when everybody was bullshitting, saying, oh yeah, I'm going to go to Israel first chance I get. He was like, yeah, I'm going to stay here in New York and work on New York. That's what I'm running for. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially his response, and to me just was akin to Nas's bar from Rule on the Stillmatic album when he says, how can the president fix up the problems when he can't fix home yet, or when he ain't fixed home yet? And that's speaking to the president. I'm talking about local politics, New York City mayor. So it's just like that times a million, but I digress. Now, I don't like, on the Mamdani side, the defund the police ideas that he's flirted with or spoken to in the past, which I feel tempered a bit, but not enough. My whole thought process, and I've mentioned this ad nauseum on the podcast, just with the policing epidemic in the country, or lack thereof, is that cops don't need to be defunded. They need to be funded more. They need to be properly trained. They need to be held to higher standards. You need more funding for cops so you can have better cops and not piece of shit cops that should never have the honor of wearing a badge and having a gun, who don't have the mental fortitude to do so. I want cops to be Navy SEAL level motherfuckers, not the I couldn't get a job doing anything else, so let me go become a cop type of folks that we wind up with because they're underpaid, because they're overworked. And something from his perspective of how he's reframing the defund to police narrative around him is that, which I can get on board with, this piece of it, which is creating a Department of Community Safety, which focuses specifically and solely on homeless, mental health issues, guns, and that in doing so, that will off the bat reduce the number of calls police take in daily by 20% and frees them up to focus on the response time of crimes that they actually signed up for. The violent crimes that cops, the brave men and women that are police officers, sign up knowing that they could do. But what they don't sign up for is having to deal with mental health issues, dealing with homeless folks on the train. And if successful, that Department of Community Safety could help mitigate that. And I understand the thought process behind, freeing cops up to focus on other levels of crime. But I would just want to underscore that takes more money, more funding, and also doesn't solve the overall problem, because it would take the more money and more funding just to create that Department of Community Safety. And you still need more money and more funding to raise the bar, raise the level of police officer that remain, not just lower the workload. He also has an idea for making buses throughout the city fast and free. He did a pilot program with one bus line within his assembly district, which apparently worked. And he explained in different interviews how that ultimately gets paid for. Thought that was interesting. And I really like this piece of his platform where he speaks to simplifying the small business opening process. Small businesses are the backbone of most communities, especially in New York. And he plans to appoint a mom and pop czar in the city and having them focus on that, cutting the red tape, the bureaucracy that folks have to go through to open up a small business, and having to go to 7 different agencies to get different permits and licenses, this and that, and just streamlining that process. I also like that he's young, he's ambitious, he's different. And I was listening to a podcast, the Laughing Out Loud podcast with Rachel La Loca, where she had the current Brooklyn Borough president on, Antonio Reynoso, which I've met a few times. And he said something that definitely resonated with me, which is that we tend as New Yorkers, and probably most folks, but just speaking to New Yorkers, to vote for the devil that we know versus the devil that we don't know, which is why we keep electing the same public officials over and over and over again. The devil that we know, the name that we know. Yet we want this massive change and shift in culture and society, or at least we say we do. And I was like, damn, that's true, right? Like if you look at the landscape of all city, or not all, but most sitting politicians within our local politics within New York, I've seen the same names since well over a decade, maybe even 2 decades, since I've started more, paying closer attention to local politics, and the same names are still floating around, just within different positions. So with that said, my vote is going to Zoran Mamdani, and there is a ranked choice voting system for this election. So you get to cast more than one vote. So you get to cast who your first pick is, your second pick, your third pick, so on and so forth. And my number 1 is going to Zoran. My number 2 is going to Adrian Adams, which is the current city council speaker. Then I have a 3, 4, and 5. My number 3, I'm not set on yet. Maybe Lander, but I'm mainly focused on those top 2. And by the way, I'll still caveat that, as hypocritical as this will sound, with saying that if Cuomo ran for president in 28, and kind of tempered his, gung-ho approach, seemingly, for supporting what's going on with the Israel-Gaza conflict, and also took inventory of and showed some accountability for what happened during the COVID crisis, which I think nobody would blame him for. And I spoke to this when I did the breakdown of his quote-unquote fall from grace. But he had this moment on Bill Maher over a year ago where they asked him if he had any regrets during that time period. And he was like, no. Did everything exactly as I should have. Do it the same way again. And it's kind of like, come on. With everything we know now, and everybody would have given him a pass also because nobody knew what the fuck was going on. And it was like, fuck, I made a bad decision. Just own it. Have the character to own it. Unless you really do feel that you did nothing wrong, in which case then you're blinded by something. Because in retrospect, with knowing for a fact, unrefutably now, that there were many bad moves made during that entire crisis, not just by Cuomo, but across the board, from the massive lockdowns, from masks that didn't work, and social distancing that didn't work, and vaccines which did injure some people, and the lab leak theory that was demonized as being conspiracy theory, which is now New York Times front page proven fact. It's like, come on, it's okay to admit when you're wrong. And it's character. That's what you can rely on when nobody's looking. Someone's character, which is why Donald Trump is such a piece of shit. But anyway, I just wanted to close out with saying that these are some good ideas that I heard within the debate from different candidates that I just wanted to highlight, which would be dope if whoever is the mayor-elect implements into their platform. One idea from Miss Ramos, which has since dropped out of the race and backed Andrew Cuomo, was raising the minimum wage, which, is a common one that we hear, but tying it to inflation, I thought was key. I thought was genius. I hadn't heard that before, so if other folks have, ran on that, my apologies, but tying it to inflation is key because, inflation is a constant that's always, in theory going up and down, but always going in effect, always going up. And it always feels from a consumer perspective that, shit is just getting more expensive or things are never changing, because when we get raises at work and it's like, the 2 or 3% or whatever it is, it's on par with inflation. So it kind of evens out and then prices go up. So it's like we get fucked. So I like that idea of tying it to inflation at least, not just raising it to some arbitrary number. Mr. Myrie, he wants to have universal after school from ages 3, so 3K, through grade 12, which I think is an awesome idea. Give kids something to do and, they'll be less inclined to be doing fuck shit in the street. Also, extend pre-K and 3K from 2:30 to 6 p.m., which is key because if you're a parent, as I am, you have to have a pretty unique situation, I think, where you either have the grandparents of the kids close by, depending on the type of job you have, the grandparents of the kids close by to be able to pick them up from school while you're at work, or you have to have a job where you're lucky enough to work from home on certain days and then balance that with your spouse, if you have one, to be able to pick up your kid at 2:30, because jobs don't end at 2:30 typically. Most folks are working through to like 5:30, and extending that to 6 p.m. solves for that very common issue that folks are having. And another dope idea, which came from Mr. Blake, was a vacant apartment tax for folks that are not living in New York City. Now, this ties to the idea of how foreign oligarchs, Russians, Chinese, so on and so forth. They buy these penthouse apartments for millions and tens of millions of dollars in New York City, for example, because the real estate is so expensive per square footage. It's a way for them to launder money, essentially. And these apartments are completely vacant. But and not necessarily laundering money, although wouldn't put it past them, but it's a store of capital, and nobody from the city is benefiting from that. So a vacant apartment tax for those not living in NYC, I think that's a good idea. Let me know in the comments, who are you voting for this New York City mayoral election of 2025? Don't forget to vote. Election day is Tuesday, June 24th, 2025.